Here's a continuation of the last project I did. I have created this sort of egg shape, and we're going to do a smooth image as opposed to a square image. I've already drawn in the shape, and I've drawn in the shadow, and I've made some approximations about light source, and my shape is selected. So now what I want to do is I want to draw the shadow onto the shape. I just painted the shape. In this case I painted it green, and I'm going to find a halfway down version to paint the shadow shape. I've got an airbrush. I'm going to test the water, and that's not bad. You have to know about where you think the midpoint or the tangent point to the light source is going to be, and I'm going to say it's about there. Because I'm using an airbrush, I don't have to. Really good designers can do this with just about any brush, but I'm using an airbrush just to keep it because I'm more secure that way. And that's that part. This is just the shadow on the body. I'm comfortable with it. I think I did a pretty good job with it. So now I'm going to drop it down to the body layer. That way later, if I want to change the color of the object, all of the color and the shadow will change at the same time. I'm going to make a sky layer. And this is going to be everywhere that I think the object is going to reflect the sky. So again, I'm coming up big, I'm on my own layer, and I can paint this quite freely. That's not the right color. I'll use blue. Pretty pale blue, something like that. And again, I can paint this in pretty freely. Wherever I think I might see sky either behind me or over there on the far horizon, I'm just going to paint it right on in with blue. First thing I'm going to do is check the opacity and see if I like the way the reflectivity is going. It's not terrible. I think I can do a little bit better. And because I'm on my own layer, I'm going to go back to my airbrush, soft round, set it to clear. Now it's an eraser. Make it a lot bigger. And just start working back a little bit. We're actually going, because of the curve of this, we're going to see the grass or the shadowing right behind the object as well as sky. So I can paint in like that. Now I'll play with the opacity a little bit. It's not bad. I want to get a little more blue back in place. So I'm going back to a normal brush. I'm going to select my blue. I'm going to paint it back in a couple places. And I want a lighter horizon or a lighter line just where the horizon ends. So I'm going to go really small now with this airbrush, select white, and see if I can't just get in like that. Not happy with the airbrush look though, so I'm going to go back to my hard round, lower the opacity down, and I'll just make an experimental layer right here. So in case I don't like the way it looks, or I want to modify the way it looks, I can still do that. That's not bad. It's a little stylized, but you know, I kind of like it that way. Now I'm grooming it a little bit. The next thing I'm going to do is paint a shadow layer. It's going to be above the body layer, below the sky layer, and I'm just going to note it here. And that's going to be reflected, oops, it's going to be called reflected shadow. So here's my layer. I do know what happened. This part of the shape right here is going to reflect some of this shadow, and this is where knowing what the angle of incidence is really important, and it's also very hard to figure out. You know, I'm curving around in here, so what am I going to see? It's going to show things that are out in this direction, things that are below it, and I'm just going to take a shot at it with black and with a normal brush. Oops, that's white. And I'm going to go ahead and fill that. Not sure I'll see it right there at the edge, but that's why I have an eraser. And now I'll set this to clear, and I can erase it back a little bit. And I think that's going to work. I'm going to drop the opacity down now. just about there. It's not going to be as dark as this very dark shadow that I've created. The last thing I want to do is set up a little highlight up here, almost as if there were a dome light overhead as opposed to the sun. And so I'm going to deselect, and I'll show you this path I made for this. Where is it? It looks like this. I'm sort of following the contour, and I'm knowing if the light is round or even rectangular, where this object gets more narrow, this is going to get more narrow. The reflection of it is going to get more narrow. And so I'm working accordingly. I have my reflected shadow, I have the body of this thing, cast shadow, the sky, everything's in place. I even like that layer, so I'm going to drop that down into the sky. So I'm cool, and I'll put a new layer that's going to be called highlight. And I'm going to try something like a very pale yellow for this. So I'm going to first come back to the path. I'm going to turn that path into a selection. I've seen people hand draw these, and I've never had terrific success drawing it by hand, so I recommend you go ahead and make a path or make some kind of lasso selection, although that's very hard to control. So I'm just going to work with a path here. Very pale yellow, and I've got a decent brush in my hands, I believe. I'm going to set it to normal, and I'm just going to sweep over it. I'm going to hide those marching ants to see what kind of effect I'm getting. And then at the very front of it, I'm going to go to just white. Now the trick here is that's kind of cool and everything, but what I really want to do is make that edge not exactly visible. So I'm going to go to another eraser brush, in this case a clear airbrush. I'm going to drop this opacity well down, make a big brush, and I'm just going to start moving across. Remember, I still have a selection, so it's not quite so vivid. And again, this is a sensation of a reflected light. If I'm not thrilled with the point on this. I think it might be a little more rounded there. So I'm just going to come around it like that. My shadow's a little bit intense. I'm going to see if I can drop that down a little bit. Yeah, it doesn't look right. I actually need to draw on it. So I'm going to select the cast shadow layer with my wand. You can see the layer is quite big. It's underneath my egg drawing, my rock, my shiny green rock drawing, I guess you could call it. But it doesn't matter. This part of it isn't showing. And again, I'll go back to my brush, which is a clear airbrush. And I'll start working back across like this, just to get it a little more appropriate to what I see. I think what I'll try here is experimentally again, so I'll put up a new layer, is to go to a normal brush, and I'm going to put a little green in it because I think it would reflect some of this green. So I'm going to come here, right about there, small brush, just a sensation of green in there. Deselect, and I'm done. I have a fairly shiny object. Again, if I want to change the color of it, I can go to the body layer, make sure everything's deselected, image, adjust. I'm going to adjust the hue here, and I can move this until I get a color that, maybe I prefer. Or if I have a client that says I really didn't want a green rock, I wanted something more in the blue range, I can keep pushing it and pushing it until I get that for them. And neither my shadow area, my reflection area, my sky area, they're not going to change because they're not going to change on a shiny object. I actually kind of like this yellow one. And that's how you do that. That's the end of this demo.